Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Joe Blarone's Chess Throne. This is Joe Blarone. Today, we are not going to be covering a typical sacrifice you would come across in the Sicilian defense. Instead, we are going to be looking at a very aggressive try that White can make in the Caro-Kann defense. If Black plays the Caro-Kann defense, this is a really aggressive opening that White can play against it. This is what I tend to play against most Caro-Kanns, and I've had a lot of success with it, partially because the opening is fairly easy to understand. There's not really dense, theoretical, crazy strategical ideas that you have to come to grips with. They're just obvious, aggressive attacking moves. Your attack on Black's king side comes about very quickly, and also this opening leaves itself open to lots of tactical possibilities, which is what I love. So, I'm going to dive straight into this. Now, there are many moves that Black could play here if they don't want to go into this crazy line of the Hillbilly attack. Oh, gee, don't you just love that name, the Hillbilly attack? I love those kind of openings where they have kind of odd moves, not like, boring, like French defense, Sicilian defense, crazy names like the Halloween Gambit, the Double Museo Gambit, the Bong Cloud, the Grob, stuff like that. I love those kind of openings, even though they might not be that sound. Sometimes I just have to try it and play it because of the name alone. This opening is a little bit different though, because although it's got a pretty funny name, I actually think this is a very sound attempt to play against the Caro-Kann defense. Okay, so even though it has a very kooky name, I still think it's got a lot of potential to be played against the Caro-Kann defense. Okay, so let's dive straight into it. So the Caro-Kann defense, for those who don't know, it starts e4 and Black responds with c6. Okay, looking to push that d5 pawn, grab a stake in the center, maybe pull the knight out to c6. I don't really know the theory of the Caro-Kann, but I know a fair few lines within the Hillbilly attack, and it's served me pretty well up to this point. So I'd like to go through one of the key lines I started playing in this opening. So c6, next move for White, first real move of the Hillbilly, bishop c4. Now this looks kind of ridiculous here because we're begging. Sorry, I might be able to hear those kookaburras in the background. I might just shut that window. So, bishop c4 begs Black to play that d5 move, attacking and kicking that bishop off the c4 square and grabbing that e4 pawn. This is exactly what White wants Black to do. So after bishop c4, Black plays d5. We want to keep this bishop on the a2 f7 diagonal. So we bring it back to b3. Pawn takes pawn. The best way to refute a sacrifice is to accept it. So pawn takes pawn. And now, see if you can spot, if you don't know the Hillbilly, think of the most outlandish, aggressive move you could make here as White. It might seem totally ridiculous, but if you picked Queen h5, that was the correct answer. Queen h5, targeting that f7 square, looking for some cheapo, nasty hack attack scholar's mate on f7. Okay, so Queen h5, g6, kicking the queen back. The queen, we want to pull her back, but keep it on the king side. The queen is almost the linchpin of this king side attack, okay? So we need this queen still on that king side. We just pull her back one to h4. Black decides I want to keep hold of that pawn. Let's develop while we're at it. Knight f6. And now you've got a few different moves you can play here as White. You can either try to regain that pawn straight away, play knight to c3, just develop that way, or play the line that I like to play the line that a lot of other more serious players rated some 500, 800 points above me have played, f3. Okay, so f3, offering up another pawn. The point is that Black takes his pawn. We then get to play knight takes f3, and what you can tell already by now, we've got that f-file open. We're going to castle kingside, bring that rook forward into the attack, okay? So, Black's next move. And the thing about Black's position is that pawn on c6 is forcing that knight to go via the route of d7. So these moves for black, in a way, black doesn't have to think too much because black really has to play bishop g7, castle kingside, bishop needs to develop, and then knight bd7, okay? So black doesn't have a lot of thinking to do, but you're pushing black into playing these moves. As a playing chess, I don't like it when my opponent tells me, all right, you're going to make these kind of moves, you need to castle kingside, put your bishop on this square. I don't really like it when my opponent dictates what kind of moves I play, okay? So this opening, it appeals to me because you're pushing black into playing this way. So black continues with bishop g7, white castles, and black continues development, bishop f5, okay? After this, white has a couple of different options. Well, there's a third option. White can just play knight c3 and continue to develop this way. But I say a couple of different options because the main moves here are either d3 or d4. Now, I like d4 a lot more just because if you play d3, further down the track, black can come up with these queen e6 shenanigans which kind of put a hole in your plans to maybe to attack. It gives the queen a nice intermezzo move to move out of the line of attack. As you'll see later on, the queen can come under fire. So d3 definitely playable, and we will go into it at some point in the future. But for now, I'm looking at d4 because for me, d4, it's an easier way to play. So after d4, black continues with their plan, kingside castle. We continue to develop, knight c3, black plays knight bd7, and now as white we need to start removing some of these defenders around black's king, and the most obvious way to do that now is first we don't play knight g5, we want to play bishop h6, remove that fianchetto bishop. Now black doesn't have to take that straight away, I mean we can take that bishop at any time as well, and then black's king will respond by taking it back, but black does not have to take that bishop. Generally, black wants to mount their queenside attack as soon as possible. b5. And now white wants to remove another defender of the king side somehow. So white plays h3 with ideas of g4, dislodging that white squared bishop of black's. And hopefully, I mean, it'd be great if black would move it back to e6 and we can swap off bishops, double up pawns, and hinder black's movement a little bit. Doesn't tend to happen though. In most cases I think I've played 3 games now where this exact line happens. After h3, black plays a5, and then we try to dislodge that bishop, and now black will take. Because if black doesn't take the bishop there on h6, if black plays instead a4, sorry, my mistake, wrong line. So after g4, if black plays a4, then we simply trade off that bishop, so the king has to take. And now we can remove that pawn there on the f7 square with bishop takes f7, since the bishop is dead anyway. Rook takes bishop, and we can remove the bishop on f5, and black's in a bit of a pickle because that pawn's going to take on g6 anyway, but if you remove it, black's king is going to be very exposed. We're going to get to play knight g5 eventually. I don't like this position as black at all. I really don't think they would play a4. So instead, after g4, going back, logical continuation for black is bishop takes on h6. After bishop takes on h6, queen takes h6, and now black plays a4. We remove that bishop. Black does the same, removes our white squared bishop, a takes b3. And now we get to take the g6 pawn, and black responds by taking it straight back, f takes g6, exposing that rook. There's no white squared bishop now, so there's no danger of any sneaky checks coming in through that big white diagonal there. So f takes g6 is fine, but this position's a little bit unclear. It's hard for me to give a convincing edge to white, I guess, just because of that very open file for black. The knight can definitely fly into g5, cause some potential checkmate threats here. But to explore this further, I'd like to look at a position that I had in a game. It came out from this exact opening being played out, which is one of the reasons I went through it. And it was at this point at move 16, and then things took a bit of an interesting turn. We were both getting a little bit low on time, but I realised Black did have some opportunities to defend themselves. I was fortunate enough that Black made some inaccurate moves, and I was able to take advantage of it. So I'll just quickly go through the last few moves of the game. Here, well, I played knight g5. Okay, knight g5. Black played queen c7. Now, this was a good move because notice that I can't go for that cheapo fork that you saw just before knight forking queen and rook, since the queen was on d8. That fork is not going to work here because if I played knight to e6, this queen flies into g6 with a check, king h1. And now Black could play something like knight h5. There is now no longer a back rank mate there, or back rank 7th rank mate there, sorry, for white. There's no queen to g7. So things are looking a little bit complicated now, and Black's pieces are starting to become active. That rook might be able to fly across to f8 maybe after rook's trade, like rook f takes on f8, rook takes on f8, and knight takes on f8. Things are actually regarded as winning for Black, okay? So at this point, I really didn't want to go down that path because of... So instead, after queen c7, I played another move that I thought was a strong move because it still had potential checkmate winning threats, okay? I played knight c to e4. Instead of knight e6, knight c to e4. Guarding that g3 square, attacking that f6 knight, and with that knight fork still playable. I could still play knight e6, forking the queen and the rook. Okay, so at this point in time, my opponent made a bit of a mistake. Okay, this was a bad error for my opponent. At this point, my opponent played queen b6. Now, this is just almost flat out losing, okay? This ended up being a loss for my opponent. I had a nice tactic, and unfortunately my opponent couldn't get their way out of it. You can pause it if you want to spot the continuing combination. I'll give you a clue. It's not knight e6 because the rook can come up to f7 and the game's going to... You're not going to get a checkmate from there. So knight e6 is not the way to go. Pause it if you want to have a crack. Otherwise, what I played in the game was... rook takes on f7. Bam. Now, if either of those three pieces take, knight takes, pawn takes, or rook takes rook, it's checkmate. It's game over. Because if you don't believe me, well, if rook takes, queen takes on h7, leading to mate with king f8, queen h8 mate to follow. If, say, knight takes on f6, it's knight takes check, with queen mate to follow if either the rook takes like we just saw or if the pawn takes, and once again if pawn takes it's mate and one. So that is not what happened. My opponent found the only move that saved their bacon momentarily. Instead, my opponent, after I played rook takes f6, my opponent played queen takes on d4 check. I simply went king h1, and my opponent in the time scrabble decided I'm just going to take that rook. Knight takes on f6. Black could have played queen takes e4 check, but knight would have just taken the queen. I ended up coming ahead, winning the endgame because I have that queen advantage, okay? But in the time scrabble, Black decided I'm going to take knight takes f6. In which case I just took with a knight check, and now if rook takes or queen takes, it doesn't matter, it will still be checkmate. Okay guys, that's how that game wrapped up. I will quickly backtrack because Black played queen b6 if you remember, and I mentioned there was another move Black could have played. Instead of queen b6, queen c7, I played knight ce4. Now Black lost with queen b6. If however they played instead queen a7, black has that diagonal, but black still guards that 7th rank. Okay, black still has that queen on that 7th rank. Not rook takes f6 no longer works because knight takes f6, leading to knight takes check and pawn takes, and all of a sudden after pawn takes, that queen, as you can see, that green arrow guards that 7th rank. So that combination will not work. So queen a7, instead white play might have continued c takes on b3, in which case the queen gets a check on d4, king runs to h1, and now rook f7. It's important to still have a piece guarding that 7th rank. Okay, we still need a piece guarding the 7th rank. Otherwise, things are going to get messy. Rook to f7, and here after rook to f7, white can harass that queen. In which case, queen will run and take that pawn. Rook d2, chasing away the queen once again. And after queen e5, now white has an edge in this position, it can be said, because there are still some tactical shots here, such as white could play rook takes d7, where if knight takes d7, this is losing for black because the rook will take on f7. Queen takes on e4 check, has to give up the queen, otherwise it's going to be mate very, very quickly. So there's still those tactical shots, but be careful, because if you have lots of time left in your game, your opponent might find a move such as this saving move, knight to g4. If black plays knight to g4, you are in trouble. There's a mate in 1 threatened, and there's a rook takes check threatened. Very dangerous position. So I wouldn't recommend that, but there might be another alternative here, queen e5, like you might just be able to say take that knight, deliver a check, swap off some pieces, win the game from there. I don't know, but I'm going to leave it at that point in time. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much into this. I hope you guys have enjoyed this video on the Hillbilly attack. I love playing this opening. Let me know if you have any success against the Caro-Kann with it, okay? Very nice, easy, simple opening to pick up and play. And I look forward to hearing what you guys come up with. So until then, I'll see you guys next time.